The bitter December wind cut through the Wyoming plains like a blade, and Sam McCready knew this would be the coldest night of the winter. At 34 years old, he'd spent half his life facing the dangers of the frontier, but he'd never gotten used to the bone-chilling cold that descended from the Rocky Mountains. As he adjusted his only wool blanket around his shoulders, a small, trembling shadow emerged, a snow-covered. It was a Native American boy, no more than 10 years old, wearing nothing but tattered rags and shivering violently. Sam felt his heart. He recognized that it was the same one he'd seen in mirrors during his own orphaned childhood on the streets of St. Louis, the look of someone losing the battle against death. Without hesitation, Sam removed his last, the only keeping him alive, deadly knife, and wrapped the boy in it. It was an act that could cost his own life, but Sam McCready had never been a man to let a child perish. What he didn't know was that by morning, 150 Lakota warriors would completely surround his small ranch, and what happened next would change his life forever. Sam McCready wasn't what you'd call prosperous. His ranch, you'd call it, consisted of a poorly built wooden cabin, a stable that looked ready to collapse, and about 20 head of cattle he'd managed to gather over 3 years of hard work. It was 2 days' ride from the nearest town, Bitter Creek, and 15 miles from the military fort. On that December afternoon in 1876, Sam was returning from a frustrating expedition to find some of his cattle that had scattered during the storm. He'd found only 3 of the 5 he was looking for, and the lost livestock represented a significant loss to his already meager winter reserve. The sun was setting rapidly, painting the sky in orange and purple hues that announced a brutal night ahead. Heavy dark clouds were gathering on the northern horizon, promising more snow. Sam urged his horse, Buck, a brown Mustang that had been his faithful companion for 5 years, to pick up the... That's when he saw the smoke. It wasn't the thick, dark smoke of a fire, but thin wisps of vapor rising from a nearly extinguished campfire. Sam pulled the reins and scanned the area with experienced eyes. He knew it could be a trap. It wasn't uncommon for travelers to be lured by fire signals only to find bandits waiting, but there was something different about them. It was too weak, too inconsistent to be from experienced adults. Sam dismounted and approached cautious, his hand resting on the handle of his Colt .45. What he found shocked him. Between the roots of a large pine tree, partially protected by low branches, was the boy. He couldn't be more than 10 years old, with long, tangled black hair and wearing only a torn cotton shirt and leather pants that had seen better days. His lips were blue, and he was shaking so violently he could barely keep the branches in the small fire that was dying out. The boy looked at Sam with dark eyes full of fear and desperation, but didn't run. He was too weak for that. Sam could see he was in advanced stages of hypothermia. He'd seen grown men die of cold in better conditions than the... "Easy there, boy," Sam said, and raising his hands to show he had no hostile intention. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy said something in Lakota that Sam didn't, but the tone was pleading. His small blue hands held some wet sticks that clearly wouldn't keep the fire going much longer. Sam looked at the darkening sky and made a decision that would change the course of his life. Without thinking twice, he removed his heavy wool blanket, the only one he owned, and wrapped the boy in it. The cold hit him immediately, like an icy fist, but he saw instant relief on the child's face. "It's okay, little one," Sam murmured, gathering dry branches from under nearby. "Let's make a real fire first, then we'll go to my place." The boy said something else in native language, and although Sam didn't understand the words, he perfectly understood the meaning. Gratitude. Getting the fire to grow was just the first challenge. Sam knew the temperature would continue dropping throughout the night, and without his blanket, he himself was at risk of losing his life. But looking at the boy wrapped in his wool, seeing color slowly returning to the small face, he knew he'd made the right choice. "What's your name, boy?" Sam asked, while feeding the fire with larger sticks. The boy watched him then touched it. "Dakota." "Dakota." Testing. "I'm Sam, Samuel McCready." The boy nodded, then pointed to himself again. "Dakota," then pointed to Sam. It was start. As the night progressed, Sam learned more about the boy's situation through gestures and a few English words that Dakota knew. The boy had been separated from his group during a storm 2 days earlier. He was lost, alone, and had been without food for at least. Sam shared his meager provision of jerky with Dakota, watching with satisfaction as the boy ate with renewed appetite. The warmth of the fire and the food were clearly having an effect. Dakota stopped shivering, and his eyes regained their brightness. "Where's your family?" Sam asked, making gestures to try to communicate. Dakota pointed north and said something long in Lakota. Sam caught only a few words that sounded familiar, place names he'd heard before. From what he could understand, the boy's tribe was camped somewhere in the highlands, probably a day or two away. As the temperature continued dropping, Sam made another crucial decision. He wouldn't survive the night without proper shelter, and the boy was strong enough to be moved. "Come on, Dakota," Sam said, putting out the fire. "Let's go to my place. It's safer there." The 15-minute journey to the cabin was one of the longest stretches of Sam's life. The cutting wind penetrated his clothes as if they didn't exist, and he had to lean on Buck several times to keep from falling. Dakota, wrapped in the blanket and riding in front of Sam, was visibly worried about the man who had saved him. Sam's cabin was modest but solid. A single room with a stone fireplace, a simple bed, a table, and 2 chairs. It wasn't luxury, but it offered protection from the elements. Sam immediately lit a fire in the fireplace, and warmth began to spread through the small. Dakota looked around with curiosity, clearly never having been inside a white man's house before. Sam noticed how the boy observed everything with sharp intelligence. The tools hanging on the wall, the provisions stacked in the corner, the rifle leaning beside the door. "Still hungry?" Sam asked, pointing to his belly and making eating gestures. Dakota nodded vigorously, and Sam prepared a simple meal of beans and bacon pieces. They ate in comfortable silence, communicating mainly through gestures and smiles. When it came time to sleep, Sam insisted that Dakota keep the blanket and use the bed. He settled on the floor near the fireplace, using his jacket as a pillow. It wasn't comfortable, but he was alive and warm. Before falling asleep, Sam heard Dakota speaking softly in Lakota. Although he didn't understand the words, he had the feeling the boy was praying, perhaps thanking the spirits for his salvation, or asking for protection for the white man who had helped him. Sam woke before sunrise, as was his habit. The fire had reduced to embers, and he quietly revived it so as not to wake Dakota. Outside, he could hear the wind still howling, but it seemed to have diminished in intensity during the night. While preparing coffee in his old iron pot, Sam planned the day. He needed to return Dakota to his people, but had no idea where to look. Lakota tribes were nomadic, especially in winter, and could be anywhere within a 50-mile radius. Dakota woke when the coffee aroma filled the cabin. The boy sat up in bed, looking confused for a moment before remembering where he was. When he saw Sam, his face lit up with a smile. "Sam!" Dakota said, pointing, then touched his own chest. "Dakota." "That's right," Sam smiled back. "Sleep well?" Although he didn't understand all the words, Dakota nodded and got out of bed. Sam noticed the boy moved with much more energy than the previous. The food and warmth had worked wonders. After a breakfast of biscuits and honey, Sam tried to explain through gestures that they needed to find Dakota's family. The boy understood immediately, pointing north again and making gestures that Sam interpreted as far and many people. That's when Dakota did something unexpected. He picked up a piece of charcoal from the fireplace and began drawing on the cabin's wooden floor. First, he drew a circle with many small dots inside, clearly representing a large concentration of people. Then he drew mountains and a river. Finally, he drew something that made Sam swallow hard. Many men on horseback carrying spears. Warriors, Sam, understanding the... Dakota nodded seriously, then pointed to Sam and made a protective gesture, as if embracing some. Then he made a series of complex gestures that Sam interpreted as, "They will protect you too." Before Sam could fully process what this meant, he heard something that made his blood freeze, the sound of many horses approaching. Sam ran to the window and peered through the makeshift curtains. What he saw took his breath away. Lakota warriors on painted war horses were emerging from the tree line in all directions. Sam counted quickly. 20, 40, 60. They kept appearing, all armed with spears, bows, and some rifles. Their faces were painted for battle, and they moved with the coordinated precision of an experienced military force, his hand instinctively going to his rifle. There must be over 100 of them. Dakota appeared beside him and looked out the window. Instead of fear, Sam saw excitement on the boy's face. Dakota said something in Lakota and pointed to a particular warrior, a tall man, on a painted horse, clearly a leader. By the way, the others positioned themselves around him. "Father?" Sam asked, pointing to the... Dakota shook his head and made a gesture that Sam interpreted as uncle or close relative. Then the boy ran to the door. "Oh, wait!" Sam grabbed it. "We don't know what their intentions," but Dakota gently freed him and opened the door. Sam held his breath, expecting the worst. The boy stepped out of the... shouted something in Lakota. Immediately, all the warriors stopped and looked at him. A murmur spread among them, and the leader dismounted and ran toward Dakota. Sam watched through the window as the warrior, who he could now clearly see was a middle-aged man with battle scars and intense eyes, took Dakota in his arms and examined him carefully, checking if he was injured. The joy on the man's face was unmistakable. After a few moments of rapid conversation, Lakota, both the warrior and Dakota looked toward the cabin. Dakota pointed to Sam, who was still at the window, and said something long and animated to the older man. The warrior listened attentively, his expression changing from suspicion to surprise and then to something Sam couldn't fully. When Dakota finished speaking, the warrior stood silent for a long moment, staring fixedly at the cabin. Finally, he nodded to Sam, making a clear gesture for him to come out. Sam picked up his rifle, not to use, but as a matter of mutual respect. A frontier man never went out unarmed. He opened the door slowly and walked outside, keeping his hands visible and the weapon pointed down. The 150 warriors watched him in absolute silence. Sam could feel the weight of all those gazes, some curious, others hostile, most simply evaluating. These were men who had fought against the U.S. Army, who had lost friends and family in the endless wars over land. Sam knew his life depended entirely on the next few minutes. The warrior leader approached slowly, studying Sam with eyes that had seen decades of conflict. He was taller than Sam, with broad shoulders and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His clothes were a mixture of traditional Lakota and practical items obtained through trade, worked leather moccasins, cloth pants, and a vest decorated with beads and feathers. When he reached a few steps away, the warrior stopped and spoke in accented but clear English. "You are the man who saved my nephew." Sam nodded slowly. "Yes, he was dying of cold. I couldn't let that happen." "Why?" The question came loaded with suspicion. Why would a white man save a Lakota child? Not carefully before he knew his answer could determine not only his own fate, but possibly relations between this tribe and other settlers. "Because he's a child," Sam said, "and every child deserves a chance to grow up." The warrior studied him for a long moment. "Do you have children?" "No," Sam answered, "but I was once a child alone and cold. I know what it's like." Behind the leader, Dakota was quickly translating for other warriors, gesticulating animatedly as he told his story. Sam could hear the word for blanket being repeated several times, along with gestures that clearly indicated sharing and generosity. "My nephew tells me you gave him your only blanket," the leader continued, "that you spent the night without it, so he wouldn't die. Any decent man would have done the same," though he knew this wasn't necessarily true. "No," the warrior shook his head. "Many white men would not have done this. Some of my own people would not have done this for a child of your race." He paused, looking at the warriors around him, then back at Sam. "I am Mahpia Luta, Red Cloud in your language. Not the same famous Red Cloud, but I carry his name with honor. Dakota is my sister's son, killed last winter by the disease brought by white men. He is all that remains of my direct family." Sam felt the weight. It wasn't just a lost boy he had saved, but the last direct member of a warrior leader's family. "I'm sorry for your loss," Sam said sincerely. Mahpia nodded briefly, then continued, "Dakota also tells me you fed him, warmed him, gave him your bed, that you treated him as you would treat your own son. He needed help more than I did. It's what any decent person would do." "Perhaps," Mahpia said, but Sam could see the warrior didn't entirely believe that. "But you did it, and for that, you have created a problem for us." Sam felt his throat tighten. "What kind of problem?" Mahpia gestured to the warriors. "We came to find Dakota. We followed his tracks here, expecting to find only his frozen body or evidence. Instead, we find him fed." He paused, letting the implication. "According to our tradition, when someone saves the life of a family member, especially a child, a debt of honor is created. This debt must be paid." Sam swallowed hard. He had heard of the complex honor traditions of Native people, but never expected to be at the center of one. "You don't need to pay me anything. I did what any decent person would do." "But it was you who did it," Mahpia replied firmly. "And now We have a debt to you. This puts us in a difficult position. Sam began to understand. A debt of honor between people who were technically enemies created political complications he hadn't even considered. Some of my warriors, Mapialuta continued, think the simplest solution would be to remove you from life quietly and bury both you and the debt. Sam felt his blood freeze, but forced himself to maintain a neutral expression. But, the warrior continued, Dakota insists you are a man of good heart, and I have seen this in your eye, so we have a dilemma. Dakota ran to Mapialuta's side and began speaking rapidly, clearly defending Sam. The boy gestured to the cabin, to the blanket he still carried, and to Sam, his voice growing urgent and convinced. Other warriors began to approach, joining the Sam could hear different tones in the conversation, some harsh and suspicious, others more thoughtful. Clearly there was a division of opinion about what to do. Finally, Mapialuta raised his hand for silence. When all the warriors stopped talking, he addressed Sam again. My men are divided. Some believe your kindness is genuine. Others believe it may be a trick to gain our. Some want to honor the debt. Others want to eliminate it. And you? Sam asked. Mapialuta studied him intensely for a long moment. I believe you saved my nephew not for gain, but out of kindness. But I am also leader of warriors who have lost family to white men. I cannot ignore their feelings. He paused again, clearly struggling with a difficult. So we will resolve this the traditional way. Mapialuta finally. You will be tested. Tested how? Though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the. Mapialuta turned and spoke in Lakota to his warriors. Sam could see different reactions on the men's faces. Some seemed satisfied, others worried, some clearly disappointed. In Lakota tradition, Mapialuta explained, when there is doubt about someone's character, especially in matters of honor debt, we offer the test of 3 paths. You choose one of 3 challenges. How you behave during the test reveals your true character. Sam nodded, waiting to hear his option. The first path is the test of courage, Mapialuta. You fight our best warrior in individual combat. If you show true bravery, even in defeat, you gain our respect. Sam looked at the warriors around him. Several were large, muscular men, clearly experienced in combat. As a rancher, Sam knew how to defend himself, but he wasn't a professional warrior. The second path is the test of wisdom, Mapia. You spend 3 days with us, learning our ways, participating in our councils, demonstrating that you can understand perspectives different from your own. This sounded less physically dangerous, but Sam knew it could be more politically risky. 3 days with a Lakota warband could be interpreted as treason by other settlers. The third path is the test of sacrifice, and Sam noticed his voice became more solemn. You give something of great personal value to benefit our tribe, something that costs you much to give, but that helps us. Sam considered his options carefully. He didn't have much of material value to sacrifice, and fighting an experienced warrior would probably result in his quick and possibly humiliating defeat. May I ask something first? Mapialuta nodded. I fail the test. What will be my fate? The warrior was, if you show cowardice or bad faith, you will be. If you show genuine character but fail the challenge, you will be freed but may never return to these lands. And if you pass, the honor debt will be considered balanced. More than that, you will be considered a friend of our tribe, under our. Sam thought about his chances in each. Combat was almost certainly a sentence of defeat. Sacrifice was problematic because he really didn't have much to give, but the test of wisdom, I choose the test of wisdom. Several warriors murmured among themselves, and Sam had the impression his choice had been unexpected. An interesting choice, Mapialuta. Most white men would have chosen combat, thinking they could impress through courage. I'm not most white men, Sam replied, and I suspect you already know that, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. Mapialuta almost smiled. Perhaps you are wiser to appear. What followed was one of the most extraordinary experiences of Sam's. The Lakota warriors didn't just allow him to join the group. They actively included him in their activities and discussion. First, Mapialuta took him to the tribe's main camp, located in a protected valley, about 8 miles from Sam's ranch. What Sam saw there challenged many of his preconceptions about the savages he'd heard other settlers describe. The camp was a well-organized community of about 300 people. The tippas were arranged in specific patterns that clearly had cultural significance. There were designated areas for different activities, a place for elders to gather, another for women to work on crafts, a space for children to play. What impressed Sam most was the complexity of the society he observed. There were spiritual leaders, counselors, specialized craftsmen, hunters, and warriors, each with clearly defined roles. Important decisions were made in council, with different voices being heard before reaching consensus. Dakota became his unofficial guide, translating and explaining things Sam didn't understand. The boy had clearly become something of a minor celebrity in the camp. His rescue story was being told and retold, each time with slightly different details. On the first day, Sam was invited to participate in a council about winter strategy. The tribe was facing serious challenges. Buffalo were becoming scarce, winter was being more severe than usual, and pressure from the U.S. military was forcing them to move constant. Sam listened carefully as different leaders presented their perspectives. Some advocated moving even further north, away from white settlements. Others argued they should stay and fight, for territory they considered sacred. A third group suggested it might be time to seek peace through negotiation. When Mahpialuta asked for Sam's opinion, he chose his words carefully. "You know your land and your people better than I ever will, but I can tell you what I see from the other side." He described the relentless determination of the settlers, the numerical and technological superiority of the U.S. Army, and the growing political pressure in Washington to solve the native question once and for all. "I'm not saying it's fair, but it's reality, and pretending it's not true won't make it disappear." Some warriors were visibly irritated by his words, but Mahpialuta asked him to continue. "On the other hand, I also see that many settlers fear you because they don't know you. They believe the stories they hear about bloodthirsty savages because they've never seen the reality of communities." He gestured to the camp around. If they saw this, families caring for each other, elders being respected, children being educated, it would be harder to justify violence. On the second day, Sam was invited to participate in a spiritual ceremony. Mahpialuta explained it was a tradition of purification and reflection, performed before important decisions. The ceremony took place in a special teepee dedicated to ritual. Sam was instructed to sit in a circle with other men of the tribe, including Mahpialuta and several elders. In the center of the circle, aromatic herbs burned in a small fire, producing sweet smoke that filled the space. A very elderly elder, who Sam discovered was Dakota's grandfather, led the ceremony. Although Sam didn't understand the words in Lakota, there was something deeply moving about the chants and prayers that resonate in the teepee. During a pause in the ceremony, the elder addressed Sam, surprisingly fluent English. "You wonder why you are here. Why the Great Spirit brought you to our Dakota, then?" "Sam, I've thought about it. My grandson tells me you removed your own blanket to warm him, that you shared your food when you had little, that you gave him your bed to sleep, slept on the floor. He needed it." The elder smiled. "Many men would say that after. Few would do it in them." He paused, studying Sam intensely. "But there is more. Dakota also tells me you cried while you thought he slept." Sam was surprised. He didn't remember crying, but why did you cry? Elder asked. Sam had to think for. I think I remembered when I was alone and cold, wishing someone would help me." "Ah," the elder nodded satisfied. "Now we see the heart of the matter. You didn't save Dakota out of abstract kindness. You saved the child you yourself once were." The truth of this statement hit Sam like lightning. All his life, since becoming an adult, he had tried to be the kind of person who would have helped the orphaned boy he had been. Each act of kindness was, in part, an attempt to heal old wounds. "And that," the elder continued, "is why your act was genuine. It wasn't calculated or political. It was from the heart." The elder turned to Mahpialuta and said something in Lakota. Sam saw the warrior nod thoughtfully. "My father says you have already passed the test," explained, "that the real test wasn't these 3 days but that night in the forest, and you passed without knowing you were being tested." On the third and final day of the test, Sam woke early and found Mahpialuta already preparing coffee over a small fire. The warrior gestured for Sam to join him. "Today, we return to your ranch," Mahpialuta said. "Your test is complete." "And what's the verdict?" Sam asked. Though he suspected he already knew the answer from the treatment he'd received. "You have shown wisdom, humility, and genuine heart, Mahpialuta. The honor debt is balanced. More than that, you're now friend to our tribe." Sam felt deep relief, but also something more, a kind of sadness. During these 3 days he had experienced a sense of community he'd never felt before. The idea of returning to the loneliness of his ranch suddenly seemed depressing. "There is something else," Mapialuta continued, as if reading his thoughts. "We have a proposal." Sam raised his eyebrows, waiting. "Winter will be long and difficult for all of us. For you isolated settlers, but also for us. Our food reserves are low. Yours too, Sam nodded. It's true. He was worried whether his provisions would last until spring. "What if we spent the winter as neighbors instead of enemies?" Mapialuta proposed. "You know the lands around your ranch better than we do. We know hunting and food preservation techniques that could help you. Together, we would all have better chances of—" It was a radical proposal. Sam knew other settlers would be horrified at the idea of such close cooperation with natives, but he also knew it made practical sense. "Where would you stay?" Sam asked. "There is a valley 2 miles north of your ranch. It has natural protection from wind and good water. We could camp there." Sam considered. The valley Mapialuta described was on land Sam technically claimed, but had never used. It would be close enough for mutual cooperation, but far enough to maintain some independence. "And what happens in spring?" Sam asked. "In spring, we evaluate how things went. If it worked well, maybe we continue. If not—" Mapialuta shrugged. "We go separate ways as friends." It was a chance to form the kind of relation settler and native Sam had always never. "I need to think about—" "Of course, Mapia. It's a big decision. But remember, you showed it's possible for our peoples to live in. Maybe it's time to show that too." The ride back to Sam's ranch was contemplative. He rode beside Mapialuta, with Dakota mounted in front of him. The boy had firmly refused to leave Sam, insisting he wanted to accompany him back to see the cabin once more. During the ride, Sam reflected on everything he had learned in the past. He had seen that the Lakota were complex people with a sophisticated society, not very different from settlers in their basic desires for security, prosperity, and family. He had also recognized something about himself. For years, he had isolated himself on his ranch, interacting minimally with other settlers in Bitter Creek. He had convinced himself he preferred solitude, but now realized he was just afraid of being rejected, as he had been. When they arrived at the ranch, Mapialuta gestured for his warriors to stay at a distance, while he, Sam, and Dakota approached the cabin. "So," Mapialuta said, "what is your decision?" Sam looked at his small ranch, the modest cabin, the poor-conditioned stable, the corral with his small herd. Everything seemed smaller and lonelier than he remembered. "Before I decide," Sam said, "I need to be honest about the risks." Mapialuta nodded, indicating he should continue. "If other settlers discover our cooperation, especially the military, there could be trouble. Some will see it as treason. And do you care what they think?" Sam thought carefully. "I care about the practical consequences. But as for their opinions," he shook his head. "No. If I'm doing the right thing, their opinions don't matter." "And do you believe it would be the right thing?" Sam looked at Dakota, who was listening attentively, though he didn't understand the entire conversation. He remembered the child shivering with cold 3 nights and how a simple act of kindness had led to all this. "Yes," Sam said firmly. "I believe it would be." Mapialuta smiled, the first time Sam had seen him do so. "Then we have an agreement." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The Lakota established their winter camp in the northern valley, while Sam worked to prepare his ranch for close cooperation. The first order of business was establishing regular communication. Dakota, who spoke both Lakota and basic English, became the official messenger between the ranch and the camp. The boy was clearly excited about his new role, running back and forth with messages and updates. Sam quickly discovered he had underestimated the value of cooperation. The Lakota brought skills and knowledge that perfectly complemented his own capabilities. For example, when a particularly severe storm hit the region in the second week, Sam was worried about the safety of his cattle. But experienced Lakota warriors helped him find and gather the scattered animals, using tracking techniques Sam had never seen. In exchange, Sam shared his own skills. His rudimentary blacksmith workshop proved invaluable for repairing Lakota tools and weapons. His reserves of modern tools, saws, axes, nails, dramatically accelerated several construction projects at the camp. But perhaps most valuable was the shared knowledge about the region. Sam knew the best locations for finding wood, where to get water during droughts, which areas to avoid during storms. The Lakota, in turn, knew animal migration patterns, edible and medicinal plants and natural weather prediction. Not everything was easy. There were cultural misunderstandings, language barriers, and moments of tension when different expectations. A particularly tense incident occurred when some young warriors, heading out to hunt, passed through Sam's ranch without permission. Sam was alarmed to see armed men on his property and nervously confronted them. The situation almost escalated to conflict before Dakota came running to translate. It turned out the warriors were simply taking a more efficient route to a hunting area, not realizing they were violating some territorial protocol. Mapialuta arrived quickly to resolve the situation. "I see we need to establish clearer boundaries," he told Sam. "Our young men don't fully understand individual land ownership concepts, and I don't fully understand your concepts of shared land. Maybe we should sit down and draw." What resulted was one of the most fascinating conversations. For several hours, he and Mapialuta, with Dakota translating more complex concepts, discussed different philosophies about land ownership, resource use, and community responsibility. Sam learned that the Lakota saw land not as something to be owned, but as something to be stewarded for future generations. Mapialuta learned about the psychological importance for Sam of having a space that was definitively his, especially considering his homeless childhood. They reached a compromise that worked for both. Certain areas around Sam's cabin would be considered strictly private, but he would allow passage through other parts of his property in exchange for advance notification. The functional cooperation between Sam and the Lakota might have continued peacefully for the rest of winter, if not for an unexpected visit in January. Sam was in the workshop helping repair some damaged spear points when he heard horses approaching. Looking out the window, he saw something that made his stomach sink. A detachment of American cavalry, led by a young lieutenant Sam recognized from Bitter Creek. Quickly, Sam went outside and waved to the soldiers, hoping he could intercept them. Discovered a camp. "Lieutenant Morrison," Sam greeted as the soldiers stopped in his yard. "What brings you to these parts?" Lieutenant James Morrison was a man of about 25, ambitious and eager to prove his worth. Sam had noticed he had a tendency to see situations in absolute terms of black and white, with little room for nuance. "Mr. McGreedy," Morrison dismounting, "we're conducting patrols in this area. There have been reports of hostile Indian activity." Sam's heart rate increased, but he tried to keep his expression neutral. "Hostile activity? I haven't seen anything like that." "Really?" Morrison looked skeptical. "Because we have reports of a large war band in the vicinity. War paint, weapons, the whole thing." The reports were probably true. Mapialuta's men had indeed arrived painted for, but they weren't hostile. Not any. "I've seen some tracks," said carefully, "but nothing recent. Could be they moved on." Morrison studied Sam's intently. "You seem nervous, Mr. McGreedy. Is there something you're not telling us?" Before Sam could answer, one of the soldiers called out, "Lieutenant, fresh tracks here, heading north." Sam's blood froze. The tracks would lead directly to the Lakota camp. "Interesting," Morrison, his hand moving to "fresh tracks leading from your ranch. Care to explain that?" Sam realized he was at a crossroad. He could lie, try to mislead the soldiers, maybe buy time for the Lakota to, or he could tell the truth and hope. Looking at Morrison's young, eager face, Sam made his decision. "Lieutenant," he said, "I need to tell you something important, and I need you to listen with an open mind." "I'm listening," Morrison, though his stance tense. "There is a Lakota band camped nearby," Sam began, "but they're not hostile. They're here because I invited them." The soldiers immediately raised their weapons, and Morrison drew his pistol. "You what?" "Lower your weapons," Sam said. "Let me explain." "Explain? You're harboring enemy combatants." "They're not enemies. They're my ally." For the next 10 minutes, Sam told the entire story, finding Dakota, the test, the winter arrangement. Morrison and his men listened with expressions ranging from disbelief to outrage. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Morrison demanded. "When fraternizing with hostiles. Treason." "They're not people trying to survive winter. Us. They're Indians," Morrison. "Savages who've killed American soldiers. And American soldiers have killed their people," Sam repeated. "That doesn't make every individual responsible for the act of their group." Morrison was clearly struggling with what to do. His orders were probably to engage any hostile Indians, but Sam's story complicated things. "I need to see this camp," and finally decided, "if what you say is true, they'll surrender peacefully." Sam's heart sank. He knew the Lakota wouldn't surrender, and any attempt to force them would end in bloodshed. "Lieutenant," Sam said desperately, "give me a chance to talk to them first. Let me explain the situation." "Absolutely not. You've already shown your loyalties." That's when they heard the sound of approaching horses, many horses. Mapialuta and about 30 of his warriors emerged from the tree line, riding slowly and deliberately. They were armed, but their weapons weren't raised. It was a show of strength, not aggression. The soldiers immediately formed a defensive line, rifles ready. Morrison drew his pistol and aimed it at Mapialuta. "Stand down," Morrison shouted. "You're surrounded." Mapialuta rode closer, stopping about 20 yards away. His eyes moved from Morrison to Sam, reading the situation quickly. "Sam," he called out, "is there a problem?" "The army wants you to surrender," Sam ripped his heart. Mapialuta almost smiled. "And if we refuse, then there will be a fight nobody wants." Morrison looked confused by the exchange. "You speaking?" "I speak many languages," Mapialuta replied, "including the language of war. But today, I prefer to speak the language of peace." "Peace?" Morrison laughed hard. "You're a war party. We were a war party. Now we are a winter camp. There is a difference." He gestured to Sam. "This man has shown us that not all white men are enemies. Perhaps you can do the same." Morrison was clearly out of his depth. His training had prepared him for combat, not to... "I have orders to apprehend hostile Indians." "And are we being hostile?" Mapialuta. Before Morrison could answer, Dakota appeared, riding double of the warriors. The boy slid down and ran to Sam, then turned to face the soldiers. "This is my friend Sam," Dakota. "He saved my life." Morrison stared at the boy, then at Sam, then at Mapialuta. "This is irregular." "Many true things are irregular," Mapialuta. What happened next surprised everyone. Dakota walked directly to Lieutenant Morrison, looked up at the young officer, and began to speak. "My uncle says you are a young warrior, like the young warriors in our tribe. Young warriors sometimes think fighting is the only way to show courage. My grandfather, the greatest courage is knowing when not to fight." Morrison looked down at the boy, clearly struggling with emotions he didn't fully understand. "You don't understand. I have duties, orders." "But what do your orders say exactly?" Sam asked. Morrison hesitated. To patrol for hostile Indian activity and neutralize threats to settlers." "Are we threatening any settlers?" Mapialuta asked. "You could be. But are we, Mapia? Right now, in this moment, are we threatening anyone?" Morrison looked around. The Lakota warriors sat calmly on their horses, weapons present but not threatening. Sam stood between the two groups, clearly unharmed and uncoerced. Dakota looked up at him with innocent eyes. "This isn't how it's supposed to be," more to himself than anyone else. "How is it supposed to be?" Sam asked gently. "Clear, black and white, hostiles and friendlies. And what if the world isn't black and white? What if it's more complicated than that?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with concept, challenged everything he'd been. "I could report this as a successful patrol. No hostile activity found." "You could," Sam agreed. "But if there are problems later..." "There won't be," Mapialuta said firmly. "You have my word." "The word of an Indian?" Morrison, though his tone was more curious than hostile. "The word of a father who lost his sister and wants his nephew to grow up in a world with less killing." Mapialuta. Morrison holstered his pistol. "I'll need to think about this." "Of course. But while you think, would you like some coffee? It's cold out here." What followed was one of the strangest coffee breaks in frontier history. Sam made a large pot of coffee, and soldiers and warriors sat around the same fire, eyeing each other warily without open hostility. Morrison found himself in conversation with Mapialuta, with Dakota translating when needed. The young lieutenant began to ask questions, real questions about Lakota life, their reasons for being in the area, their intention. "Why don't you just go to a reservation? Would you live in a prison?" Mapialuta. "Because that's what reservations are. Prisons where we wait to die slowly instead of quickly." Morrison seemed taken aback by the directness of the answer. "But the government provides food, shelter. The government provides just enough to keep us alive, but not enough to let us live," Mapialuta explained. "We are a people who have lived free for generations. To be caged, even in comfort, is to die inside." One of Morrison's soldiers, a grizzled sergeant named O'Brien, spoke up. "But you can't fight the whole U.S. Army." "No," Mapialuta, "which is why we're here, trying to find another way." "What kind of other way?" Morrison. Sam joined the conversation. "A way where we learn to live alongside each other instead of trying to destroy each other." "Is that even possible?" Morrison asked, skeptically. "Look around you. We've been doing it for weeks. No one's been killed. Everyone's been fed. Problems get solved through talking instead of shooting. Morrison. Soldiers and warriors sat side by side, sharing coffee conversation. It wasn't the war scenario he'd been trained for. This is just one small group. You can't scale this up. Why not? Dakota asked. If we can do it, why can't others? Morrison didn't have a good answer. As the afternoon wore on, Morrison found himself faced with a decision that would define his character. He could follow his orders to the letter and attempt to arrest the Lakota, which would certainly result in bloodshed, or he could recognize that the situation didn't fit the neat categories his training had provided. I need to speak with my men, Morrison. He gathered his soldiers a short distance away for a private conference. Sam watched anxious as the young officer explained the situation. He could see disagreement in their faces. Some clearly wanted to follow standard protocol. Others seemed affected by what they'd witnessed. Sergeant O'Brien, who had the most experience, seemed to be arguing for a pragmatic approach. One younger soldier appeared to be pushing for aggressive action. Morrison listened to all viewpoints before making his decision. When they returned to the fire, Morrison addressed both Sam and Mapialuta. I'm going to file a report stating that we conducted a thorough patrol and found no evidence of hostile Indian activity in this sector, he announced. The tension around the fire immediately decreased. However, Morrison continued, I need some assurances. This arrangement of yours, it stays peaceful. Any violence, any raids, any threats to settlers, and all bets are off. Understood, Pialuta nodded. You have my word. And I need advance notice if you're planning to move on. Other patrols might not be as understanding as we've been. Agreed. Morrison mounted his horse, then paused. For what it's worth, he said to Sam, I think what you're doing takes guts. I'm not sure I could do it. You did do it, Sam replied. You chose understanding over violence. That took guts, too. Morrison nodded, then turned to Mapialuta. Take care of that boy, he said, gesturing to Dakota. He's got wisdom beyond his years. I will, Mapia. As the soldiers rode away, Sam felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The immediate crisis was over, but more importantly, they had proven that understanding was possible even in the most unlikely circumstances. The visit from Morrison's patrol, rather than ending the cooperation between Sam and the Lakota, actually strengthened it. Word of the peaceful encounter spread through both communities, and Sam noticed a change in attitude among the Lakota warriors. Where before there had been some suspicion and wariness toward him, now there was genuine acceptance. He had proven his loyalty and tested, choosing to reveal the truth rather than be his new ally. Mapialuta pulled Sam aside a few days after the patrol's departure. You could have lied to your soldier, the warrior observed. Could have sent them away without them knowing we were here. I thought about, but that would have meant living a lie. And if they found out later, it would have made things. You risked much by telling truth. We all risked much by choosing cooperation over conflict, Sam replied. It seemed right to continue taking that risk. Mapialuta nodded approvingly. My father was right about you. You do have genuine. As winter deepened, the cooperation between the two communities evolved into something even more sophisticated. They developed joint hunting parties that were far more effective than either group could manage alone. Sam's knowledge of the terrain, combined with Lakota tracking skills, led to successful hunts that fed both communities. Lakota introduced Sam to winter plants and roots that could supplement their diet during the harshest month. He showed them techniques for preserving meat using salt and smoking methods that his grandfather had taught him. Dakota became more than just a messenger, became a cultural bridge, helping each side understand the other's ways. The boy was clearly thriving in his role, growing in confidence and wisdom. As winter began to give way to spring, both Sam and Mapialuta knew they faced a crucial decision. Their arrangement had been successful beyond either's expectations. Spring would bring new challenge. Other settlers would be returning to the area after wintering in town. Military patrols increased. The buffalo herds would begin their migration, which traditionally meant Lakota would need to follow them. What are your thoughts about the future? Sam asked Mapia during one of their regular evening conversations. My people are happy here, Mapialuta replied. Happier than they have been in many seasons, but I know this cannot last forever in its current form. What would you like to see happen? Mapialuta was quiet for a long moment. I would like to see more arrangements like this one. More places where our peoples can live as neighbors instead of enemies. That would require others to be as open-minded as we've been, and that will be the challenge. Sam had been thinking about this problem too. What if we started small, invited a few select settlers to visit, see how things work here? You would do that? Risk your standing with your own people? My standing with my own people isn't worth much. It's based on ignorance, and they decided to experiment. Sam would approach some of the more open-minded settlers in Bitter Creek and invite them to visit his ranch, Lakota, not to live together necessarily, but to see that peaceful coexistence was possible. The first person Sam approached was Dr. Elizabeth Henley, one of the few women practicing medicine on the frontier. Sam had always respected her practical approach to problems and her willingness to treat anyone who needed help, regardless of their background. Dr. Henley's first visit to the ranch carefully, Sam arranged for her to arrive during a time when some of the Lakota women and children would be visiting the ranch, making the environment feel. Dakota played a crucial role. Charming Dr. Henley was intelligent and curious about medicine. The doctor was clearly impressed by the boy's quick learning and thoughtful question. This child has natural aptitude for healing, she told Sam. With proper education, he could become an excellent physician. The visit also allowed Dr. Henley to observe the sophisticated knowledge of herbal medicine possessed by the Lakota women. She was particularly impressed by their understanding of plants she'd never in her medicine. They know uses for local flora that could revolutionize treatment out. This not Dr. Eastai. Henley became the first advocate for the arrangement among the settler community. Her endorsement carried weight because of her respected position and practical nature. Next, Sam approached Thomas O'Sullivan, an Irish immigrant who ran the general store in Bitter Creek. O'Sullivan had always been suspicious of official authority and sympathetic to underdog causes. O'Sullivan's visit was arranged around a trading session. The Lakota had beautiful handcrafted items, beadwork, leather goods, weapons, that they were willing to trade for manufactured goods. O'Sullivan immediately saw the commercial potential. This could be profitable for everyone, he told Sam. They make things I can't get anywhere else. They want things I can easily. Within a month, a small but growing network of open-minded settlers were participating in what became known as the Spring Valley Arrangement, named after the valley where the Lakota had spent the winter. Not everyone was supportive of the arrangement. Some settlers viewed any cooperation with Indians as betrayal. A few threatened to report the arrangement to military authorities, despite Morrison's earlier decision to let it continue. The most vocal opponent was Marcus Whitmore, a wealthy rancher who owned extensive lands south of Bitter Creek. Whitmore had political connections and used them to put pressure on both civilian and military authorities. This McReady fellow is setting a dangerous precedent, Whitmore argued in letters to the territorial governor. If we allow settlers to make private treaties with hostile, where does it end? The pressure reached Lieutenant Morrison, who was ordered to make another patrol to the area and file a more detailed report. This time, Morrison arrived with a larger force and a captain named William Hayes, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics against Indians. Captain Hayes was not as open to dialogue as Morrison had been. He saw the situation in strictly military terms. Unauthorized Indians in proximity to settlers represented a threat that needed to be eliminated. This arrangement ends now. He arrived at his ranch. These Indians will be escorted to the nearest reservation immediately. Sam knew this was the moment of everything they had built was about to be tested in the most serious way possible. Captain, Sam said carefully, before you make any final decisions, I'd like you to meet some people. What happened next was the culmination of everything Sam and Mapialuta had worked toward. Instead of just talking about peaceful coexistence, they were able to demonstrate it. Dr. Henley arrived as previously arranged to provide medical care to anyone who needed it, settler or Lakota. O'Sullivan came with a wagon load of trade goods. Several other settlers who had become part of the network also appeared, creating a scene of bustling, peaceful cooperation. Captain Hayes found himself witnessing something he had never seen before: genuine integration between white settlers and Native Americans, with both sides benefiting and neither side dominating. Dakota, now fully bilingual and comfortable in both cultures, served as guide and translator for Captain Hayes, explaining the various activities and relationships. This boy, he said to Sam, he speaks better English than half my soldiers. He's been learning from Dr. Henley, Sam explained. She says he has real aptitude for medicine. Hayes watched as Lakota women worked alongside settlers, sharing technique. He saw Lakota men helping settlers repair equipment while learning to use new tools themselves. How long has this been going on? Since winter. Nearly 4 months of peaceful incidents, conflict, minor disagreements, but nothing that couldn't be resolved through talking. Captain Hayes was clearly struggling with what he was witnessing. His orders were to remove unauthorized Indians from settler areas, but the situation defied the assumptions those orders were based on. Mahapia Luta approached the captain directly. "You are leader of these blue-coat soldiers," he said in English. "I am. Then you understand responsibility of leadership, making decisions that affect many lives." "I do. We ask only for chance to continue what we have started. No harm comes to anyone. Both our peoples benefit." Hayes looked around the ranch again, taking in the scene of cooperation and "What happens when your tribe wants to follow the buffalo?" he asked. "This arrangement only works if you stay in one place." It was a practical question that got to the heart of long-term sustainability. "We have discussed this," Luta replied. "Some of our people will follow the herds as tradition requires, but some will stay if we can find a way to make permanent arrangement." Sam stepped forward. "Captain, what if I told you we had a proposal that could benefit everyone, the settlers, the Lakota, and the U.S. government?" Hayes looked skeptical, but indicated Sam should continue. "What we've created here is a model for peaceful coexistence," Sam began. "Instead of constant warfare, we have cooperation. Instead of resources being wasted on conflict, they're being used productively." "Go on." "Dr. Henley will tell you that the medical knowledge we've gained here could revolutionize frontier health care. O'Sullivan will tell you that the trade relationships are more profitable than anything. I can tell you that this arrangement has made all of us more secure, not less." Sam paused, letting this sink in. What if, instead of trying to force all Native Americans onto reservations, the government created designated cooperation zones, places where voluntary integration could be tried with proper oversight and support? It was a radical, but Sam could see he had Captain Hayes's attention. "You're talking about a completely different approach to Indian policy." "Hayes, I'm talking an approach that works. Look around you. This works." Mapia Luta added his voice. "My people do not want to fight forever. We want our children to grow up in peace, but we also want to remain who we are. This arrangement allows both." Captain Hayes spent the rest of the day observing and asking. He interviewed settlers and Lakota alike, trying to understand how the arrangement functioned and what its limitations might be. That evening, he made his decision. "I'm going to recommend to my superiors that this area be designated as an experimental cooperation zone, with proper oversight and regular evaluation." The relief around the fire was palpable. "However," Hayes continued, "this will require formal agreements, legal documents, official recognition from territorial authorities. We understand. We're willing to work within the system if the system is willing to work with us." 6 months later, Sam stood on his porch watching children play in his yard, both white and Lakota children learning games from each other and inventing new ones together. The Spring Valley Cooperation had become official U.S. policy, the first of its kind. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still people on both sides who opposed the arrangement, but it was working. Dakota, now fluent in English and beginning to read medical texts under Dr. Henley's tutelage, had become something of a symbol of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict. "Are you satisfied with how things turned out?" Mapia Luta asked Sam on the porch. "More than satisfied," Sam replied. "Amazed. Do you ever think about that night when you gave Dakota your blanket?" Sam nodded. "Every day." "Do you regret it?" Sam looked at the children playing, at the mixed community that had grown around his simple ranch, at the peace that had replaced fear. "That was the best decision I ever made," he said firmly. Mapia Luta smiled. "The debt of honor has been paid many times over. You saved one child, and in return, you helped save 2 peoples from destroying each." As the sun set over the Wyoming plains, Sam reflected on how a single act of compassion, sharing his last blanket with a freezing child, had grown into something far larger than he could have imagined. The 150 warriors who had surrounded his ranch that winter morning had come as potential enemies. They had left as friends and had returned as partners in building something new. Sometimes, Sam thought, the greatest victories aren't won through fighting, but through the courage to choose kindness when it would be easier to choose fear. Years later, when Sam was an old man, he would tell the story of that December night to anyone who would listen. By then, the Spring Valley model had spread to other areas of the frontier, creating a network of cooperation zones where settlers and Native Americans worked together instead of fighting each other. Dakota had become Dr. Dakota Wilson, taking Sam's middle name as his own surname, and had established the first integrated medical practice in the territory. He never forgot the white man who had shared his last blanket with a freezing child. The story became legend, told around campfires and in saloons, in tribal councils, and in churches. It was the story of how one simple act of human decency had changed the course of history in a small but significant way. And every time the story was told, it carried the same message. In a world that often seems divided by fear and hatred, there is always hope for those brave enough to choose compassion. Sometimes all it takes is sharing your laughter.